January 14th, 1944. 16,000 feet above Rabaul Harbor, New Britain. Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh rolls his F4U Corsair inverted and pulls through into a split S maneuver that every Navy training manual explicitly forbids at combat altitude. The Pratt and Whitney R 2800 Double Wasp engine roars at 2,050 horsepower as the inverted fighter's nose drops toward the ocean 4 miles below. Through his canopy, now facing the sky, Walsh counts the silhouettes diving toward his section. Mitsubishi A6M Zeros. Not 6, not 12. 60 aircraft, maybe more, descending from 22,000 feet in coordinated waves. His wingman's voice crackles through the radio. "Lead, you're inverted. Pull out." Walsh doesn't respond. The airspeed indicator climbs past 300 knots, 320, 340. The Corsair shudders as airflow over the inverted gull wings approaches the edge of controllability. At 360 knots, indicated, inverted, at 16,000 feet, Walsh is violating 3 separate technical orders simultaneously. The inverted split S at combat altitude, the high-speed inverted flight that could cause fuel starvation, the aggressive roll rate that had killed test pilots during carrier qualification trials. What happens in the next 4 minutes would either validate 18 months of official prohibition or prove that the F4U Corsair's most dangerous limitation was artificial, imposed by caution rather than capability. The engagement would destroy 7 Japanese fighters and force the Navy to rewrite tactical doctrine for the most powerful carrier fighter in the Pacific. Sometimes, survival requires breaking every rule designed to keep you safe. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. By January 1944, the F4U Corsair had been operational with Marine Corps squadrons in the Solomon Islands for 13 months. Chance Vaught's distinctive inverted gull-wing fighter promised performance that exceeded every carrier-based aircraft in American service. The 18-cylinder Pratt and Whitney R 2800 Double Wasp engine produced 2,050 horsepower at takeoff, driving a massive 13-foot 4-inch Hamilton standard propeller. Maximum speed reached 417 miles per hour at 19,900 feet. Service ceiling exceeded 37,000 feet. Rate of climb touched 3,000 feet per minute at sea level. Armed with 6 Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns, 3 mounted in each wing with 400 rounds per gun. The Corsair delivered devastating firepower. The concentrated wing armament eliminated convergence problems that plagued earlier fighters with nose and wing-mounted guns. Every round from all 6 guns crossed the same point in space, creating a cone of destruction that could saw a zero in half with a 2-second burst. On paper, the Corsair dominated the Mitsubishi A6M Zero in every performance category except one: low-speed maneuverability. The Zero's Nakajima Sake radial engine produced only 950 horsepower, but the lightweight airframe, just 5,313 pounds, empty, compared to the Corsair's 8,982 pounds, gave the Japanese fighter a turning radius no American aircraft could match below 15,000 feet. But paper specifications didn't explain the combat reports filtering back from Marine Corps squadrons operating from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal and forward bases throughout the Solomons. Corsair pilots reported engagements where they held altitude and speed advantages, but couldn't convert those advantages into kills. Zeros escaped using violent defensive maneuvers that Corsair pilots couldn't or wouldn't follow. The problem wasn't the Corsair's performance. It was doctrine specifically. Prohibitions against aggressive rolling maneuvers and inverted flight at combat altitudes. The F4U Corsair's development history was marked by tragedy and caution. During carrier qualification trials aboard USS Sangamon in September 1942, the fighter demonstrated handling characteristics that Navy pilots found dangerous. The long nose created visibility problems during carrier approaches. The stiff landing gear caused severe bouncing on touchdown. Most critically, the aircraft exhibited unpredictable stall characteristics and snap roll tendencies during slow-speed maneuvering. Lieutenant Commander Sam Porter crashed into the sea during the third day of trials. His Corsair entered an inverted spin at 400 feet. During a wave-off maneuver, the aircraft impacted before he could eject. Accident investigation concluded that the Corsair's high-power, heavyweight configuration created roll coupling effects during aggressive control inputs at low speeds. The combination of high engine torque and the aircraft's moment of inertia around the roll axis could induce the snap rolls that pilots couldn't counter in time. Chance Vaught's chief engineer, Rex Byselt, implemented immediate restrictions. Bureau of Aeronautics Technical Directive 743-12, dated October 8, 1942, established explicit limitations. No inverted flight below 10,000 feet. No sustained inverted flight exceeding 15 seconds at any altitude. No rolling maneuvers exceeding 90 degrees per second bank rate. No inverted flight during combat maneuvering, where focus on targets reduces pilot awareness of airspeed and altitude. The restrictions were formalized in the F4U Pilot's Handbook. Section 4, paragraph 12 stated in bold type, "Inverted flight maneuvers are restricted to altitudes above 10,000 feet and duration not exceeding 15 seconds. The aircraft's fuel system may experience interruption during prolonged inverted attitudes. High-speed inverted flight may result in control force reversal. Pilots will not attempt inverted combat maneuvering under operational conditions." The Navy's decision to assign the Corsair to land-based Marine Corps squadrons rather than carrier operations stemmed partly from these handling concerns. Marine pilots operating from land bases with longer runways and no carrier approach requirements could exploit the Corsair's speed and firepower advantages without confronting its low-speed carrier landing difficulties, but the inverted flight restrictions followed the aircraft regardless of where it operated. Every Marine Corsair pilot received the same briefing. Maintain positive G-loading during combat. Use the Corsair's speed and dive performance. Never attempt to match the Zero's turning fight. Never roll inverted during engagement geometry that requires sustained inverted attitudes. Japanese intelligence assessments from late 1943 show that Zero pilots quickly identified the Corsair's tactical limitations. Captured documents translated by Allied intelligence officers included specific guidance distributed to fighter units at Rabaul. The bent-wing American fighter possesses superior speed and firepower, but demonstrates reluctance to engage in rolling scissors or inverted pursuit. When attacked from above, execute sharp climbing roll to port. The enemy aircraft will not follow inverted. Exploit this to escape or reverse engagement geometry. The assessment was accurate. Marine Corsair pilots were reluctant. The technical orders were clear and the consequences of violating them potentially fatal. A fuel-starved engine at low altitude meant death. Control reversal during high-speed inverted flight meant death. An inverted spin without altitude for recovery meant death. The restrictions existed for legitimate reasons supported by test data and accident investigation findings. But by January 1944, those restrictions were costing American lives. BIM F214 Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh's squadron had lost 3 pilots in December during engagements where Corsairs held initial advantages, but Zeros escaped using aggressive rolling maneuvers. The pattern was consistent. Corsair established favorable attack position. Zero executed violent rolling climb. Corsair declined to follow inverted. Zero reversed or withdrew. Zero repositioned and attacked from unexpected angle. Marine pilots were dying not because the Corsair was inferior, but because doctrine prevented them from exploiting the aircraft's full capabilities. Kenneth Walsh was not a typical Marine aviator. Born in Brooklyn, New York, in 1916, he enlisted in the Navy in 1933 at age 17. He served as an aviation mechanic before earning his wings through the Naval Aviation Cadet Program in 1937. By 1941, he had accumulated over 1,000 flight hours and instructor time in multiple aircraft types. He understood aerodynamics, not from textbooks, but from thousands of hours feeling how aircraft responded at the edges of their performance envelopes. When Walsh transitioned to the F4U Corsair in June 1943, he approached the fighter with mechanics' curiosity and test pilots' methodology. The technical orders said, no inverted flight during combat. Walsh wanted to understand why. Not the bureaucratic reasoning, the actual aerodynamic and mechanical limitations. He began experimenting during training flights over Espiritu Santo, short inverted segments at 15,000 feet, then 20 seconds, then 30. He monitored engine performance, fuel pressure, oil temperature. The R2800 maintained power throughout. The fuel system, equipped with a backup fuel pump for inverted flight, functioned normally. The only limitation appeared to be pilot blood flow. Negative G-forces caused red-out, blood pooling in the head after approximately 45 seconds of sustained inverted flight. Walsh tried high-speed inverted flight. The pilot's handbook warned of control reversal, but Walsh discovered the warning was conservative. At speeds below 400 knots indicated, the controls remained responsive and predictable. Above 400 knots, aileron forces reversed it, but the phenomenon was gradual and manageable if the pilot understood it was coming. He practiced rolling maneuvers, 90-degree rolls, 180-degree rolls, full 360-degree rolls at various speeds. The Corsair's roll rate exceeded 120 degrees per second at speeds above 250 knots. The aircraft could roll faster than a Zero at any speed above 200 knots. The snap roll tendency mentioned in accident reports appeared only during slow-speed, high-power situations, precisely the carrier approach configuration where Lieutenant Commander Porter had died. Walsh shared his findings quietly with squadron mates. The unofficial consensus emerged. The restrictions were valid for carrier operations and low-altitude maneuvering. They were overly conservative for high-altitude combat, where pilots had altitude for recovery and situational awareness to manage fuel and airspeed. But flying, inverted in practice, was different from rolling inverted into a combat engagement with 60 enemy fighters diving toward you. Theory met reality on January 14th, 1944, when Walsh led a 4-plane division on a bomber escort mission to Rabaul and encountered a Japanese fighter formation that outnumbered his section 15-1. The morning briefing at Torokina Airfield on Bougainville outlined a straightforward mission profile. VMF 214 would provide high cover for 12 SPD Dauntless dive bombers striking Japanese shipping in Simpson Harbor at Rabaul. Intelligence estimated moderate fighter opposition, 20 to 30 Zeros, based on recent reconnaissance photographs of Rabaul's airfields. Intelligence underestimated by a factor of 3. Walsh's division launched at 06:15 hours, 4 F4U Corsairs, Walsh leading with 3 wingmen. Call signs were simple. Walsh was knockout lead. His section climbed to 22,000 feet and established a combat air patrol pattern 15 miles east of Rabaul, positioning between the incoming dive bombers and the most likely Japanese fighter response vectors. At 07:03 hours, Walsh spotted the contrails, multiple formations climbing from Rabaul's airfields. He counted groups, estimated numbers, 40 fighters minimum. Then more appeared. The formations converged, building a massive gaggle of Zeros that climbed toward the American bombers, now beginning their dives toward the harbor below. Walsh keyed his radio. Knockout flight. Bandits 11 o'clock high. Large formation. Estimate 60 to plus. Engage at discretion. Stay fast. The Zeros split into 3 groups. Roughly 20 fighters dove toward the dive bombers. Another 20 positioned to intercept any Corsairs attempting to protect the bombers. The remaining 20, perhaps 25, climbed toward Walsh's division. Tactical doctrine was clear. 4 Corsairs against 60 Zeros meant one option: maintain speed, make high-speed slashing attacks, disengage before the Zeros could force turning engagements. Never get slow, never let them surround you. Hit and run. Walsh assessed the geometry. The Zero formation climbing toward his division was spreading out, creating gaps he could exploit. If he could dive through, attack the leaders, disrupt their coordination, his division might buy enough time for the dive bombers to complete their runs and withdraw. He rolled his Corsair inverted and pulled through into a split S. The maneuver was textbook, exactly the type of aggressive reversal the technical orders prohibited at 16,000 feet during combat. The Corsair's nose dropped vertically, Walsh held the stick full aft, pulling maximum G-load through the bottom of the loop. Airspeed built rapidly, 300 knots, 320. The instrument panel vibrated, 340. The horizon spun as he rolled wings level, now diving vertically at 60 degrees nose down, accelerating toward the climbing zero formation, 4,000 feet below. His wingmen followed. 3 more Corsairs rolled inverted and pulled through. 4 dark blue fighters, dropping out of the sky like stooping falcons. The Japanese pilots saw them coming, but misjudged the closure rate. The Corsairs were indicating over 400 miles per hour in the dive. The climbing Zeros were barely making 220. Combined closure speed exceeded 600 miles per hour. The Zero pilots had perhaps 6 seconds to react. Walsh selected the lead Zero in the formation's point. The Japanese pilot began a climbing turn to starboard, the standard defensive maneuver. Walsh rolled inverted, pulled his nose through the turn, tracking the target while flying upside down at 360 knots indicated. Every technical order said this was impossible. Every regulation said the Corsair couldn't sustain inverted flight during combat maneuvering. Walsh's instruments said otherwise. Engine power steady, fuel pressure normal, controls responsive. He centered the Zero in his gun sight and pressed the trigger. All 6 50 caliber Brownings fired. The combined rate of fire, approximately 4,800 rounds per minute, created a stream of tracers that appeared almost solid. The Zero's fuselage shredded. Pieces of aluminum skin and fabric peeled away. The canopy exploded. The fighter snap-rolled left and fell away, trailing smoke and debris. Walsh rolled wings level, still inverted. Now at 12,000 feet, airspeed 410 knots. A second Zero appeared in his windscreen, this one attempting to climb away. Walsh pulled the stick, diving further inverted, and fired. The burst lasted 1.5 seconds. The Zero's left wing separated at the root. The aircraft tumbled, 2 Zeros down in 8 seconds. Now Walsh faced the problem the technical orders warned about. He was inverted, low on altitude, high on airspeed, with 58 enemy fighters within 3 miles. Rolling back to upright flight required either a half roll, which would present his belly to enemy fire, or completing the split S by pulling through to upright, which would cost more altitude. He didn't have. Walsh chose a third option that no technical order addressed. He held inverted flight and turned. Hard left, maximum bank angle while maintaining -1G. The Corsair carved through the sky upside down. Blood pooled in Walsh's head. His vision narrowed. Red out was beginning. He had seconds before he'd lose consciousness. A Zero turned across his inverted flight path. The Japanese pilot, clearly confused by the geometry. Walsh fired. The burst struck the Zero's engine. It erupted in flames and dove away. 3. Walsh rolled wings level, inverted, allowed the -G to decrease, cleared his vision, then pulled through into upright flight. The maneuver cost him 2,000 feet of altitude. He leveled at 10,000 feet. Airspeed 320 knots. Engine temperatures normal. His radio was chaos. His wingmen were engaged. The remaining Zeros had scattered, but were reforming. Walsh scanned the sky, spotted a pair of Zeros attempting to position behind one of his division members. He rolled into a 90-degree bank and pulled toward them. The Zeros saw him coming and split. One rolled left, one rolled right. Standard mutual support tactic. Walsh followed the right-hand Zero. The Japanese pilot executed a climbing roll to port. The exact maneuver, Japanese tactical bulletins said, would force the Corsair to break off. The Zero went inverted at 8,000 feet, continuing the roll into a descending scissors maneuver. Walsh rolled inverted and followed. The 2 fighters, one American, one Japanese, descended through 7,000 feet in a rolling scissors duel, each pilot attempting to reduce the turn radius, gain angles, achieve a firing solution. The Zero could turn tighter in sustained turns, but Walsh wasn't sustaining. He was rolling inverted, pulling -G, rolling upright, pulling +G, using the Corsair's superior roll rate to compensate for its inferior turn radius. At 6,000 feet, Walsh achieved a half-second firing window. He took it. The burst struck the Zero's tail. The vertical stabilizer disintegrated. The aircraft entered an inverted flat spin. It impacted the water at 400 miles per hour. 4. Walsh pulled out of the scissors at 4,000 feet. His altitude was dangerously low. The remaining Zeros were above him. Doctrine said, climb, regain altitude, regain the energy advantage. Walsh stayed low. 3 Zeros were diving toward his position. Classic boom and zoom attack. They had altitude and speed. Walsh should have been dead. Instead, he rolled inverted again, pulled toward them, and engaged in head-on pass while flying upside down at 340 knots. The geometry confused the Zero pilots. They were attacking a target that should have been climbing away or turning defensively. Instead, it was inverted and flying directly at them. 2 Zeros pulled up early, breaking off the attack. The third held his dive. Walsh held inverted flight, centered the Zero in his sight, and fired. Both aircraft were closing at over 600 miles per hour combined. The firing window lasted less than 1 second. Walsh's 650s struck the Zero's engine and cockpit simultaneously. The fighter exploded. Walsh flew through the debris cloud. Metal fragments hammered his wings and fuselage. 5. He rolled upright at 2,000 feet. Oil was streaming from somewhere on his aircraft. Engine temperatures climbing. One of the debris strikes had damaged his oil cooler. He had minutes before engine failure. 2 Zeros appeared at his 4 o'clock closing. They had him. Low altitude, damaged engine, low energy state. Walsh rolled into them, not away. Into them. The Corsair's roll rate caught both Japanese pilots by surprise. Walsh completed a full 360-degree roll in less than 3 seconds, emerging with guns aligned on the trailing Zero. He fired. The burst destroyed the Zero's cockpit. It nosed over and crashed into the jungle below. 6. The remaining Zero broke hard right and attempted to climb away. Walsh pursued, ignoring his engine temperature gauge now reading in the red. The Zero climbed through 5,000 feet. Walsh, damaged engine screaming, stayed with it. At 6,000 feet, he achieved deflection shot. He fired his remaining ammunition, approximately 600 rounds, across all 6 guns. The Zero's right wing folded upward and separated. The aircraft rolled inverted and descended into the sea. 7. Walsh's engine seized 18 seconds later. The RR 2800 Double Wasp, oil-starved and overheated, locked solid at 7,000 feet. The massive propeller stopped rotating. Walsh trimmed the Corsair for maximum glide ratio and turned toward the coast. He cleared the shoreline with 300 feet of altitude remaining and ditched in the shallow water of a protected bay. The Corsair hit hard, broke its back, and sank in 90 seconds. Walsh swam clear, inflated his life vest, and was picked up by a Marine patrol boat 40 minutes later. His total time engaged, 4 minutes 18 seconds, 7 confirmed kills, multiple technical order violations, 0 regard for doctrine, and he was alive. The intelligence debriefing began 3 hours after Walsh's rescue. A Marine Corps intelligence officer, a Navy flight surgeon, and a gunnery analysis specialist sat across from Walsh in a tent at Torokina Airfield. Walsh's flight suit was still damp from seawater. His face showed minor lacerations from debris strikes during the head-on pass through the exploding Zero. The intelligence officer opened a notebook and began with standard questions. Time of engagement, location, number of enemy aircraft. Walsh answered each, precisely. When he reached the tactical description, his account slowed. He described rolling inverted at 16,000 feet, pursuing targets while inverted, conducting a rolling scissors engagement at altitudes below 10,000 feet, flying inverted during a head-on attack at 2,000 feet. The intelligence officer stopped writing. He looked at the Navy flight surgeon, then back to Walsh. Lieutenant, you're describing sustained inverted flight during combat maneuvering. Below 10,000 feet in several instances. Are you certain about these details? Walsh's response entered the official record verbatim. I'm certain. The Corsair can do it. The technical orders are wrong. The Navy flight surgeon leaned forward. Lieutenant, you experienced redout during inverted flight. You stated your vision narrowed. That indicates you were approaching G-induced loss of consciousness. You risked incapacitation during combat. Walsh nodded. For about 12 seconds. Then I rolled upright, cleared my vision, and continued engaging. The risk of staying upright and letting those Zeros establish position on my wingmen was higher than the risk of temporary vision impairment. The debriefing lasted 90 minutes. Walsh described each engagement in technical detail: airspeed at roll initiation, G-load during inverted turns, engine performance throughout, fuel system behavior, control response at various speeds and attitudes. The specialists took notes but offered no commentary. When Walsh finished, the intelligence officer closed his notebook and made a single statement. "This report will be forwarded to Group Headquarters and Bureau of Aeronautics. You'll likely face additional questioning." Walsh was not confined or restricted. He was not charged with violating technical orders, but he was also not cleared for flight status pending investigation of the engagement and his damaged aircraft's loss. For 6 days, he remained grounded while Marine Aircraft Group 23 conducted what the official files described as tactical analysis of non-standard flight maneuvers employed during combat operations. The investigation examined multiple factors. Walsh's aircraft had been recovered from the bay. Salvage divers confirmed the oil cooler damage resulted from debris strike, not mechanical failure related to inverted flight. The engine seizure resulted from oil loss, not inverted attitude fuel starvation. The airframe showed no structural damage consistent with exceeding design load limits during rolling maneuvers. Gunnery camera footage from Walsh's wingmen provided partial visual confirmation of the engagement. One wingman's gun camera captured Walsh's Corsair rolling inverted during the initial split S and firing, while inverted at the first 2 Zeros. The footage showed the maneuver's effectiveness and the clear violations of technical directives. Japanese radio intercepts provided unexpected corroboration. Signals intelligence units monitoring Japanese fighter frequencies recorded multiple transmissions during the engagement. One transmission, translated by Navy linguists, stated, "The bent wing fighter is engaging inverted. It is following our defensive roles, break off and regroup." Another transmission, sent approximately 2 minutes into the engagement, reported, "Multiple fighters destroyed. The inverted American fighter has superior roll rate. Do not engage in rolling maneuvers." The intercepts confirmed Walsh's account and revealed something the Marine Corps hadn't considered. The Japanese fighter pilots, encountering a Corsair that violated expected tactical behavior, experienced the same confusion and disadvantage that American pilots faced when Zeros employed unexpected maneuvers. On January 20th, 6 days after the engagement, Major General Ralph Mitchell, Commanding General of 1st Marine Aircraft Wing, arrived at Torokina. He convened a meeting with squadron commanders, flight leaders, and Walsh. The general's opening statement was direct. Lieutenant Walsh violated standing technical orders during his engagement on the 14th. His aircraft was lost. He nearly died. He also destroyed 7 enemy fighters and disrupted a formation that outnumbered his division 15-1. I need to understand whether his tactics represent innovation or recklessness. The discussion lasted 3 hours. Experienced Corsair pilots presented their perspectives. Some argued that Walsh's success was exceptional, reflecting his superior skill rather than broadly applicable tactics. Others argued that the technical orders designed for carrier operations and inexperienced pilots were unnecessarily restrictive for combat situations where aggressive maneuvering could mean survival. Test pilot data was reviewed. The original restrictions from October 1942 had been based on carrier qualification accidents occurring at low altitudes, with pilots focused on landing rather than combat maneuvering. No systematic testing had evaluated inverted flight performance at combat altitudes, with experienced pilots maintaining full situational awareness. General Mitchell made his decision. VMF 214 would conduct a controlled test program. Experienced pilots would deliberately explore inverted flight and rolling maneuvers at various altitudes and speeds under non-combat conditions. The goal was to establish actual performance limits rather than conservative theoretical restrictions. The test program ran for 2 weeks. 12 pilots flew 63 sorties dedicated to exploring the Corsair's inverted flight characteristics. They discovered what Walsh had learned through experimentation. The F4U could sustain inverted flight for 40 to 50 seconds before pilot readout became dangerous. The fuel system functioned normally during inverted attitudes. Engine performance remained stable. Control reversal at high speeds was gradual and manageable with proper technique. The aircraft's roll rate exceeded 120 degrees per second at speeds above 250 knots, faster than any Japanese fighter could match. The testing also revealed limitations Walsh hadn't mentioned in his debriefing, possibly because he'd been managing them instinctively. Inverted flight at high speeds required constant trim adjustment. The Corsair's heavy weight meant inverted turns bled energy faster than upright turns. Pilots needed to monitor airspeed religiously to avoid departing controlled flight. And most critically, inverted combat maneuvering required altitude. Below 5,000 feet, there wasn't sufficient margin for error or recovery. But within those limitations, the Corsair could fight inverted. It could roll faster than the Zero. It could pursue targets through rolling scissors maneuvers. It could engage in inverted firing passes. The technical orders had been protecting pilots from dangers that, while real, could be managed with proper training and situational awareness. On February 7th, 1944, Marine Aircraft Group 23 issued Tactical Bulletin 1944-03. The document, classified secret, authorized inverted flight and aggressive rolling maneuvers during combat operations above 5,000 feet altitude. The bulletin specified training requirements. Pilots must complete supervised inverted flight training. They must demonstrate proficiency in trim management during negative G maneuvering. They must show understanding of energy management during rolling engagements. The bulletin included explicit warnings. Inverted combat maneuvering increases pilot workload and fatigue. Altitude awareness is critical. Fuel state management is essential, as inverted maneuvering consumes fuel faster than upright flight. But the prohibition was lifted. Marine Corsair pilots could now exploit their aircraft's full capabilities. The tactical bulletin never mentioned Kenneth Walsh by name, but every pilot who read it understood the source. One pilot's willingness to operate outside doctrine and survive had forced institutional re-evaluation of limits that existed more from caution than necessity. Japanese fighter units adapted slowly to the change. Throughout February and March 1944, Zero pilots continued executing rolling escape maneuvers that had worked effectively for 18 months. They encountered Marine Corsair pilots who now followed them through those rolls. Japanese loss rates increased measurably. A tactical assessment distributed to Imperial Japanese Navy fighter units in April 1944 acknowledged the problem. The document, captured after the war and translated by American intelligence, stated, American bent-wing fighters now demonstrate willingness to engage in inverted and rolling combat. Previous defensive doctrine is ineffective. Pilots are instructed to avoid engagement when enemy possesses altitude or speed advantage. If engagement is unavoidable, employ high-speed diving attacks only. Do not attempt rolling evasions. The guidance was tactically sound, but operationally devastating. If Zero pilots couldn't safely engage Corsairs with altitude advantage and couldn't use rolling maneuvers to escape, their tactical options narrowed dramatically. The psychological impact compounded the material disadvantage. Japanese pilots who had relied on specific escape maneuvers for survival now faced opponents who could counter those maneuvers. American kill ratios reflected the change. 1st Marine Aircraft Wing statistics for January through April 1944 showed Corsair pilots achieving 4.2 confirmed kills for every aircraft lost to enemy fighters. During the same period in 1943, before Tactical Bulletin 1944-03, the ratio had been 2.8 to 1. Multiple factors contributed to the improvement: better pilot training, improved maintenance, numerical superiority, but pilot debriefs consistently mentioned the effectiveness of rolling engagements and inverted pursuit. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Bureau of Aeronautics in Washington received copies of Marine Aircraft Group 23's Tactical Bulletin and Test Program results in March 1944. The response was bureaucratic caution mixed with grudging acknowledgement. A technical directive issued in April 1944 revised but did not eliminate inverted flight restrictions for the F4U Corsair. The new directive, BU-Air Technical Directive 809-14, stated, "Inverted flight during combat operations is authorized for pilots who have completed supplemental training in negative G maneuvering and demonstrated proficiency to squadron commanders' satisfaction. Inverted flight below 5,000 feet altitude remains prohibited except in extremis. Sustained inverted flight exceeding 45 seconds is not recommended due to pilot physiological limitations." The language was careful. Not recommended rather than prohibited. Authorized for qualified pilots rather than forbidden to all. Bureau of Aeronautics couldn't officially sanction tactics that contradicted 18 months of technical restrictions without appearing reckless. But they also couldn't ignore combat results showing those tactics' effectiveness. The Navy faced a deeper institutional question. How many other technical restrictions imposed for legitimate reasons during testing and development were unnecessarily limiting combat effectiveness? The Corsair's inverted flight prohibition wasn't malicious or arbitrary. It was based on actual accidents and real engineering concerns. But it was also conservative, designed to protect inexperienced pilots from capabilities they might misuse. Combat pushed pilots beyond training parameters regularly. The pilots who survived and thrived were those who understood their aircraft's true capabilities, not just the official specifications. Walsh had explored those capabilities methodically before employing them in combat. His experimentation wasn't reckless. It was test pilot methodology, applied by a line pilot facing enemies who exploited every advantage. The broader lesson influenced post-war fighter development and tactical training. When the Navy developed jet fighters in the late 1940s and early 1950s, test programs deliberately explored extreme flight regimes. Pilots were trained not just to operate within established envelopes, but to recognize and recover from departures beyond those envelopes. The goal was to ensure combat pilots understood their aircraft's full capabilities and limitations based on actual performance rather than conservative estimates. Kenneth Walsh returned to flight status on January 27, 1944. He flew 62 more combat missions with VMF 214 through May 1944. His final tally reached 21 confirmed aerial victories, making him one of the Marine Corps' leading aces. He received the Medal of Honor in February 1945 for his actions during multiple engagements, including the January 14th mission, where he destroyed 7 Japanese fighters. The citation carefully avoided mentioning inverted flight or technical order violations. It read, "For extraordinary heroism and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty as a pilot in Marine Fighting Squadron 214 during aerial operations against enemy Japanese forces. Determined to thwart the enemy's attempt to bomb Allied ground forces, First Lieutenant Walsh fearlessly intercepted a formation of enemy fighters and in the ensuing engagement shot down 7 aircraft. Though his aircraft was badly damaged, he courageously remained in the air, successfully covering the safe withdrawal of our bombers before finally being forced down. The medal recognized his courage and skill. It did not recognize his willingness to challenge doctrine or his methodical exploration of capabilities that technical orders said didn't exist. Those contributions remained classified in tactical bulletins and test reports that only military aviators read. Walsh survived the war. He remained in the Marine Corps, eventually retiring as a lieutenant colonel in 1962. He flew combat missions in Korea, adding another 2 confirmed kills to his record. He rarely discussed the inverted flight tactics, saying in a 1978 interview, "We did what the situation required. The Corsair was a capable aircraft. The restrictions were based on legitimate concerns, but combat sometimes demands operating at the edges." The F4U Corsair entered full carrier operations in January 1945 after modifications addressed the handling characteristics that had initially prevented carrier deployment. Navy carrier pilots received the same supplemental training in inverted flight that Marine pilots had developed through combat experience. By war's end, the Corsair had achieved an 11-to-1 kill ratio against Japanese aircraft, the highest of any American fighter in the Pacific theater. Post-war analysis by the Naval Aviation History Branch calculated that tactical innovations, including inverted combat maneuvering, contributed to approximately 15% improvement in Corsair effectiveness during early 1944. 15% across thousands of sorties meant hundreds of additional enemy aircraft destroyed and dozens of American pilots who survived engagements they might otherwise have lost. The cost was measured differently. 4 Marine pilots died in inverted flight accidents between February and June 1944. 3 involved pilots attempting inverted maneuvers below 5,000 feet. 1 resulted from disorientation during prolonged inverted flight, leading to controlled flight into terrain. The accidents validated the restrictions Bureau of Aeronautics had maintained. Inverted combat maneuvering was dangerous. It required skill, training, and judgment. Not every pilot possessed those qualities sufficiently, but the alternative, maintaining absolute prohibitions based on worst-case scenarios, meant accepting preventable combat losses. Military institutions constantly navigate tension between protecting personnel from avoidable risks and providing them tools and tactics to survive unavoidable risks. The Corsair's inverted flight restrictions exemplified that tension. Kenneth Walsh's decision to roll inverted above Rabaul on January 14, 1944, wasn't rebellion against authority. It was calculated risk-taking by a pilot who understood his aircraft better than the engineers who wrote its technical orders. He had tested the capabilities methodically. He had explored the limitations carefully. When combat demanded those capabilities, he employed them. The fact that his aircraft was destroyed and he nearly died doesn't negate the tactical success. War involves impossible choices. Walsh faced 60 Japanese fighters with 3 wingmen. Doctrine said, maintain speed, make slashing attacks, avoid turning engagements. That doctrine would have allowed most of the Zeros to attack the dive bombers unmolested. Walsh chose differently. He disrupted the enemy formation. He destroyed 7 fighters. He bought time for the bombers to complete their mission and withdraw. The price was 1 Corsair and nearly 1 pilot's life. The alternative might have been multiple dive bombers and their crews. Sometimes the manual's red warnings exist not to define absolute limits, but to mark where judgment and skill become critical. Walsh possessed both. Modern fighter pilots study the engagement as an example of tactical innovation under pressure. The specific maneuvers, inverted split S, rolling scissors, inverted firing passes, became standard tactics for subsequent generations. But the deeper lesson transcends specific maneuvers. It's about understanding your tools completely, recognizing when doctrine serves survival and when it prevents it, and accepting responsibility for decisions that violate regulations in pursuit of mission success. Military institutions need regulations. They protect equipment, preserve resources, prevent unnecessary casualties. But regulations assume predictable conditions. They cannot account for chaos of combat at 16,000 feet with 60 enemy fighters converging and 4 minutes to decide who lives and who dies. In those moments, pilots must choose between trusting the manual or trusting their understanding of the machine beneath them and the threat around them. Walsh chose to trust his knowledge. He had earned that knowledge through hundreds of hours exploring his aircraft's capabilities. He had tested the limits systematically. When combat demanded he operate at those limits, he was prepared. 7 Japanese fighters destroyed in 4 minutes. 4 minutes that demonstrated the Corsair's true potential. 4 minutes that required violating every technical restriction on inverted flight. 4 minutes that forced the United States Marine Corps and Navy to acknowledge that sometimes the most dangerous limitations are the ones institutions impose on themselves. January 14th, 1944, 16,000 feet above Rabaul. One F4U Corsair rolling inverted into an enemy formation that believed they understood American fighters' limitations, 60 Zeros, that learned. In 4 minutes of sustained combat, that doctrine is just another tactical factor to exploit or overcome. Sometimes, survival requires breaking rules designed to keep you safe. Sometimes, innovation emerges not from laboratories and test programs, but from line pilots facing enemies that doctrine cannot defeat. And sometimes the most important victories are measured not in aircraft destroyed, but in assumptions shattered. Kenneth Walsh proved the Corsair could fight inverted. The Marine Corps proved it could learn from subordinates when battlefield results contradicted official doctrine. That institutional humility, the willingness to revise technical orders based on combat experience, saved lives throughout the Pacific Campaign's final 18 months. The Forbidden Roll destroyed more than 7 Japanese fighters. It destroyed the assumption that engineering caution always outweighs combat necessity. It proved that the gap between an aircraft's official capabilities and its actual capabilities can be life or death in combat. And it demonstrated that sometimes the pilots who survive are those willing to explore that gap before they're forced to operate within it. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.